Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Unfiltered Vet Discussions. We are glad to have you with us today. If you would like to know more about us, you can go to unfilteredvetdiscussions.com. We are on multiple social media platforms, so choose your favorite and like us and follow us. Please give us comments. We'd love to hear feedback from our audience. And with that ado, we are going to talk about something very important, and that is, can you land a jumbo jet? Phil, how, what did we get started on flying airplanes today in our
Yes, so there was 100%. There was a study that came out of YouGov in January, and so one in three Americans, when they were surveyed, said that in an emergency with no training, they would be able to land a 747 or a passenger plane. When only men were taken out of that, when you were just serving the men, the percentage jumped up to 46%. So almost 50% of men in the United States that were surveyed felt that with no training, they would be able to land, a 747.
Which means that if you just looked at the women, it was probably more like 20%.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because my name is not Bruce Willis or Mark Wahlberg. I don't feel that these are things that I can do naturally. So the reason that we started talking about this was I was listening to some of the podcasts that I was not part of in how do we gain how do we gain confidence, and how are we taken seriously, and how do we minimize the gender gap? And so it's a lot of things about men versus women. And in about, I don't know, the mid 90s, I took a women's study class, and they talked about the fact that as infants, women are held closer to the body and are not moved around, whereas male infants are held further away from the body and are jostled a lot. In preschool, girls are rewarded for sitting still and keeping quiet. And when boys run around like wild, they're just being boys. Move it up to high school, it's my oldest child is about to go to homecoming. It is still the boy's job to ask the girl out on the date. It is not the girl's job to ask the boy out. And in doing so, we teach boys at a young age that taking risks is rewarded. Maybe the girl says yes. Maybe the little toddler gets the ball because he ran for it faster than somebody else. So they're taught that taking risks are rewarded, and in doing so are more likely to own a business because they're not afraid of failing. They've shown that in classrooms, girls will not raise their hand, to the point where a Girl Scout started a badge for girls to raise their hand in the classroom, because this little kid noticed in her classroom that all the boys were raising their hand, and half of them didn't even know the answer. They were just either being funny, or they truly did not know. And the girls would sit there quietly, and she would sit there quietly, and she knew the answer to the question. And so it was this kind of, again, she was rewarded for being quiet. So how do we break these chains that we are taught inadvertently, not at anyone's fault, as children, that women are supposed to keep their thoughts to themselves and keep quiet, and men are the ones to take risks? Peter, what did you say was the difference in male ownership of veterinary practices versus the number of males in vet schools?
But Jenny, before we go there, you are obviously completely opposite of that conversation as the woman who is dominating this conversation. So your confidence is exuding all over the screen. So thank you from that standpoint.
My mom actually used to tell me to be more demure and more quiet because I was too intimidating to men. And I will be honest in the fact that I was the one who asked the guys out. I never waited for them. They're too slow.
You know, I just feel shrinkage every time I see you. So that being the case, the answer to the question is I think 40% of companion animal hospitals are owned by women. 80% of the students in veterinary school are women. There's a significant discrepancy between the stage of ownership and the salaries of men versus women. We are still, at least in the veterinary profession, we've got a gender gap in the veterinary profession. But I want to challenge something. I think there's some generational changes that we as baby boomers, Gen X, and maybe some older Gen Ys are not noticing in young Gen Ys and Gen Zs, where especially the veterinary students are very female dominated in terms who asks the question, who leads the classes and everything else. So I think there are some, I don't really want to get focused on a gender basis, but I do think there are some generational changes that are both gender and generational going on that we see, and not just in the veterinary field, but in other industries as well.
So are you saying that when you teach classes, are you noticing that women are, well, there's more women, I guess?
Well, there are, but they're the ones who tend to have the questions.
Well, I think about how it was when I told my me mom I was applying to, well, I was going to Texas Tech University. I was in high school. I lived with her my senior year, and I remember we were running this little garage sale at her house, and I told her, I'm going to Texas Tech, me mom, and then I'm going to go to CSU and I'm going to be a veterinarian. And she was just so upset by this. And she said, have you really thought this through, honey? Because I think it'd be way more proper for you to maybe become a hairdresser in Amarillo. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but we lived in a small town about 2 hours away from Amarillo, and that was, in her mind, her generation, that's what a modern woman did. And so it was quite a jump for her to see where I was going. In the end, she was very proud of me and saw that. But I think you're right. It's a lot of time, generation changes coming through, so that, I think I told this before, it wasn't until the 80s that women could even get their get a credit card by themselves. So time in the saddle.
And what kind of following up on this, what I'd like to add is not so much gender, but the stories that we tell, around gender. When I was taking some of my positive psychology certifications, one of the studies that really stuck out to me, and it's similar to what we're talking about here, but during math exams, when you took the exam and had to put demographic information, i.e., whether you were male, female, or identified in another way. When women took that and had to identify as female, now I'm guessing the statistic, but it was about 15. They did about 15% worse overall on the exam than when they didn't have to identify as female, or identify their gender. The flip side to that is what I would say is, as a male, is, we were talking about as we grow up, well, what are some of the stories that we're told, as men, is that, you don't cry, you don't do this. And let this sink in. And this is something that, I got from Brene Brown that just hit me between the eyes, is the only acceptable emotion most of the time that men can show is anger. Like, we can't cry, can't be too over the top, generally speaking, just generally, that John Wayne, even keeled, like that's the, what, and again, this is back, story before, but when we continue to tell ourselves that story, it takes hold. And, we were talking about like first year in practice, and that was very much like, I went into surgeries or I went into things and said, I can do this. Like, I can do this. And there was some of that pilot stuff in there too, where it was like, I didn't have that intellectual humility, which some of that came with time, some of that came with learning. But, just wrapping all of those things in, is that the power of the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves is infinitely powerful. So,
and continuous, Phil. It's just not one story. It's like hit repeat, right? Like the loop goes on with the story of self and how that sits in with us, you know, and how we present ourselves. Because a lot of people put their own limitations up through those stories, right? Jenni, I'm kind of like you today. I'm like you, like, yeah, let's go. I don't have time for this. Let me be the one who steps forward, right? But back in the day, talk about generational thing, you know, no, like I was the most advanced math kid in my high school just because of the umpteen zillion moves my parents made. I ended up just by fate being there. And I was the girl with all the guys because I was the one helping. And in the 80s, none of the other girls knew what to do with me because I was hanging out with the guys in a math class because I didn't fit the stereotype. Right? So what do you do with like Mima? What do you do with a girl who's in, you know, advanced calculus and nobody else knows what to do with that? And today everybody's like, oh, cool, you're in advanced calculus. When can we get a Starbucks and talk about it? Right?
I do think a lot of what Peter said, that it's happening over time, I 100% agree with. I have a non-binary oldest child, a male middle child, and a female young child. And when I say that female is me, my 10-year-old, she is sassy, spicy, in charge, knows what she wants. And I think it's great. It's difficult to parent, but I do think it's great that she has this confidence, that confidence is encouraged. And you're right, Kelly, like her being good at math isn't weird, like it was.
No, like it
her
was.
being good. No, her being good. Right. And I think that a lot of the ways to break a lot of this is how are we raising our kids? Not just the stories that we tell ourselves, but the stories that we tell our children so that they can tell themselves those stories. That, yeah, look, you like that guy? Don't wait for him to ask you out. Go get him. You know, for my son, yes, you like art. It's okay to like art. You don't have to play football. Now my son is literally 14 years old, 6'1", and I want to say, close to 200 pounds. He would be a great on the line playing football. That's not him. He is a gentle giant. He hates doing any of that. Fine. I'm not going to force him to, he's a black belt in karate and he hates sparring. He just wants to do the katas and the weapons, but he doesn't want to maybe hurt somebody. And that's okay. And so I think it is, like Phil, what you were saying, that, oh, you're only allowed to be angry. We have to change that narrative that it's okay to feel something. It's okay to cry. It's okay to not be intimidated by strong women. For women, it's okay to ask for what you want. It's okay to believe that you can, I think Peter said in one of the other ones, it's okay to take yourself seriously. And it's okay to take yourself not so seriously. And it is the stories that we tell, but we have to be aware is step one, that there are these differences so that I can ask for the money that I deserve with regards to the pay gap.
So let me throw another variable. Regionalization, urban, suburban, rural. Okay, so I grew up essentially in the suburbs of New York City. So I'm probably about as different from my background as from Stacee. My mom was a biology teacher. Her brother, because of the generation, was an MD, PhD. She was smarter than him. Her dad was a doctor. They didn't let women go to medical school back in that generation, but she was the one who dominated the family as the older sibling. And so she really was the one who dominated our family in many ways and set the direction from that standpoint. I think that's more commonly seen in urban and suburban settings than might be seen in rural settings from that standpoint. So you've got so many variables that ultimately determine the the goulash that becomes a human entity, gender, non-gender specific. So think about that variable too.
And decade, right? Like, this blows my mind that my grandfather was born in 1902. My grandmother was born in 1910. So Stacey, credit cards were not given to women in the day. They couldn't even vote, right? And my family is very longevity, so they tended to die around 100, 105. So there's a lot of history there. And then you learn about women, like my grandmother was so smart. She was not the boy, so she did not get to go to college. Her brother Art was sent to college, right? And it was also the Great Depression. And how that crafts us and how that comes out of us, and then how that longitudinal history, like your Mima or my grandmother looking at us, ladies or gentlemen growing up, or our grandfathers, depending on the longevity of the lives, how far does the old influence the new?
Yeah, my mom, she was one of 6, and she was known as the beautiful sister. And she was very striking, even when she was in her 90s, very striking woman. And that's what made her successful in life. And so you should see the fallout from us girls in the family as that being what's values placed upon is your hair, your weight, your makeup, your jewelry, your sunscreen, your wrinkles, all this stuff. That was me. One time I went to visit her in the old folks home, and her sister was there, and she was telling me, Stacey, your hair looks so beautiful. And my grandma couldn't hear her, and she's like, what'd she say? And I said, she said my hair looks beautiful. And my mom says, well, I wouldn't go that far. So it's just funny, like that was what my cousins had to kind of break out of to move up the family stories to the next level. So it just goes, I guess over time, this is how we grow and evolve.
But what happens when the stories take you the other way and all of a sudden you think you can land a jumbo jet? Like, what happens when you tell yourself you're so amazing and then you kill everybody on the plane?
That fascinating stuff. So that some of that comes from Gen X parenting, where self-esteem was like, you're the best, you're unique, you're so good. And that actually did cause, so what's fascinating is seeing that is switching from self-esteem more to self-compassion, which we've talked about a number of times in some other episodes. But the impact of that is not being able to have some intellectual humility, like being able to be strengths-based, but not everything is a strength. That's where, but also, to Stacey's point, is to not have to flagellate ourselves, like, and, beat ourselves up. Like, if my hair doesn't, look a certain way or what have you, is that being able to lean into the things that I am good at and celebrate those, but that I'm not good at everything. And my son does karate, and he gets mad when he doesn't get a medal every time. And it's like, Bubba, like, those kids right there have been practicing 2 hours a day, like every day, as well as what, and so anyway, I see a lot of me and my son with that stuff. It's like, but anyhow, just fascinating though, how if we move the pendulum too far, one way or the other, the impact that can have. But so that's not all self-esteem. Some of that is just like the Dunning-Kruger, effect that we were talking about. Yeah.
So I have just an interesting question. First of all, no way would I ever want to try to land an airplane. It's not in my interest level. But for the doctors, I've been on airplanes where they call, is there a doctor on the plane? Somebody needs medical help. I don't move an inch. My wife hits me in the ribs with her elbow. You're a doctor. I know I'm a doctor, but the last thing I want to deal with is people from that standpoint. And my first thought is liability and exposure from that standpoint. So maybe I'm a little conservative. So Dr. Phil, Dr. Stacee, what do you do?
Well, I'll say a bit. I mean, we've all been on those flights, and same thing is like, I will say to myself, if absolutely no one else, like if it's serious and like no one else, but also knowing, because I read, I'm like, what do you do in those situations? And they have emergency clinicians on a phone, and I'm like, I'm not the one. Like if the dog they brought in the in the carrier, is having trouble breathing, like maybe, but what am I going to do? Like I got a pen and and an iPhone, like there's not a whole heck of a lot I can do. Stacey?
I don't know. I'd probably raise my hand and try to help, and if there was somebody else that was more skilled, I'd defer. But if it's between me and a nurse or nobody, or, yeah, I'd give a shot to help somebody. But I'm definitely going to be reading the room. And if there's a cardiac surgeon right there, like, I'll help you do whatever you need to do to help the person. But yeah, I guess.
But even that, like if a dermatologist, like, because there's memes about that, and it's like, the dermatologist goes to stand up and like
me and a dermatologist.
Right. No, but I think the dermatologist would appreciate that.
Stacy's landing the plane.
I don't know. I don't think I could do that. But if I can take directions really well. So if someone was telling me what to do, I could do it.
There's a great episode of MASH with Father Mulcahy and Radar where they have to do a tracheotomy with a pen.
Oh, gosh.
There you go. That's about as good as I can get.
It's interesting because my husband would never stand up. I would be more likely to stand up and be like, oh, well, I'm CPR certified. Like, what can I do? And he would be like, hell no. And it's now seeing that to me is the opposite of what we were just talking about. But maybe that's our nurturing side that we're like, no, someone needs help. By God, we're going to help.
Well, somebody in my life told me I could do it, right? Like my grandma told me I should work on my hair. My mother told me I could be anything I wanted regardless of my gender. And my father told me the same thing too. Like, you can do whatever you want, and don't worry what me mom says. It's always nice for your hair to look good, but let's focus on getting straight A's, that sort of. So I think knowing that you have the ability to make a difference in someone else's life, and it doesn't have to be your own kids, it could be the neighbor kids, it could be people in your community. People might be listening to you more than you think. So be careful with what you say and try to show the women around you and the boys around you that this is normal.
Just as we get close to the end, when we started the conversation, Phil, my mind went back to the movie Airplane.
Right.
And it's like, I'm going to be the autopilot balloon sitting next to the pilot, right? Exactly. Jaime, the autopilot.
Yeah.
That was a great movie.
Great movie.
Classics. Well, Peter, would
So
you
there
wrap
you go.
it up today for us?
Wrap it up. Sure, I'll wrap it up.
With a quote from Airplane, please.
With a quote from Airplane. No, I just see the guy landing sweating, because that's how I'm sitting here trying to wrap this up, trying not to sweat. Bottom line, I think it's a great question to anybody who's listening. Given the need, would you jump in? Would you jump in with both feet? Would you jump in with 1 foot? Or would you be there to support somebody else as they jumped in? And then ask yourself, what generation are you in? And just, it'd be interesting to just see what impact so many variables. And we never even talked about social media and its impact on decision-making too. So this is a conversation that could go on for hours, but somebody has to land the plane, and we want to get to the gate on time. So let's wrap it up and bring it home.
Well, thank you everybody for participating today. We look forward to hearing from you next time, and please shoot us a comment and say, yes, I'd land the plane, or no, I wouldn't, on any of our social media. We look forward to hearing from you soon. Until later.